Welcome to what may be an extremely bad video version of the MMA Prospectus. My internet connection appears to be total crap today, but we're still going to try and see what we can get out of this show. I have no idea why. It's been like this all week for me. I've been dropping signal, and it's just been a huge pain in my ass. But Tom is here to help buoy me, carry me through this show, give you the entertainment that I know you all love so dearly. We're going to be talking. We're going to start out with a little recap of UFC 193. Talk about Holm Rousey, Jędrzejczyk, maybe a little bit about Jake Matthews, some of the other fighters on that card. Talk Ultimate Fighter TUF 2 finale, or TUF Latin America 2 finale coming up here. Couple of fighters on that card, and then maybe hit Bellator 146 and World Series of Fighting 25 before we wrap everything up. Just to give a big overview of all the young fighters fighting on major cards this week. So, Tom, thanks for joining me.
It's no problem. And you know what? I know why your internet's been so slow this week. It's because the internet is just overloaded with blazing hot Ronda takes this week.
I know I've just been playing different GIFs of her getting knocked out nonstop with like different cartoon faces on them, and reading all the op-eds talking about the death of women's MMA, or how Holly Holm is the next super uber mega star for the UFC, or Ronda Rousey is the next mega star, to hear the New York Times put it. Yeah. That was a brilliant op-ed. Did you read that?
I didn't, but I heard the gist of it.
It was amazing. Their top 10 replacements for Ronda Rousey included John Jones, CM Punk, Demetrius Johnson, and Ronda Rousey.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's about as hot takes get.
Yeah, that CM Punk, man, I can't wait to break down his first fight.
No question. And DJ Mighty Mouse is just one exciting performance away from being that unheralded superstar in the wings.
He's on the cusp, man. He's so close. He just needs to be, I don't know. I love DJ, but man,
100 pounds heavier.
Yeah, that would probably help. Man. If you're just like Frank Mir size, man, you'd be good to go.
Hopefully without the Frank Mir body. Seeing Demetrius Johnson with like Frank Mir's physique would be really
like that kind of appears to be like the trade-off you have in MMA. If you're going to be that size, you got to have pretty much that body. Because if you have any semblance of high level athleticism, I was actually having this conversation with someone who's not an MMA fan, just as like a athlete thing. I mean, unless you're like the top 5 person in the sport, you can make so much more money being the 6th man on an NBA team.
Oh yeah,
like so much more money than being like the 50th best player in the, or not even the 50th, like the 100th best player in the NBA. So much more than being the 20th best MMA fighter.
Oh yeah,
like
I mean, you can make way more money being. You can make as much money being like a practice squad NFL player.
Yep.
That will get you as much money.
Half the brain trauma.
Oh. Well, so yeah, I mean, that's one of those things too that I've tried to tell people as well, is that most really great athletes seem to grow up playing like 3 or 4 sports, and then when it comes to what they do, when they go pro, they pick the one that makes them the most money. Very rarely do you hear about an athlete who just got tracked into one sport early as an incredible elite athlete and stuck with that out of passion.
Yeah. I remember distinctly in the Chicago area, Jeff Samardzija was like the big guy because he played Division I football at Notre Dame and baseball at a really high level. So then when he was a senior, he had to pick, and he picked baseball, and his rationale for it was, openly said that A, you have a longer career when you pitch in baseball than you do playing in the NFL, and B, since there's no salary cap in the MLB, I can make more money over that longer career than I could in the NFL. So when you're that kind of athlete, those are the choices you're kind of making.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, you hear how many quarterbacks do you hear about were like baseball pitchers, and it was like, well, I can go to school on a full ride scholarship and get to the NFL, or I worry that I would be stuck in the minor league system without a guaranteed contract. That's like
Yeah.
these guys, and so like they may have different rationale for the sports they pick, but a lot of times, if you're a really top athlete, you're doing, you don't hear that many guys who are just like, oh, well, all I did was this, and then I was amazing at it, so that's all I ever did.
Yeah.
And that's a bad sign for MMA, especially attracting big light heavyweight and heavyweight talent. We may always kind of be scraping the barrel for those leftovers,
We
but
just need 2 or 3 every 15 years or so.
it's true.
Because now that John Jones maybe has his head on straight, we got at least another 10 years with him being a top 10 fighter, as long as he wants to fight. I mean, if
Yeah,
previous light heavyweight careers are anything to go by, 2025, Jones is probably still going to be hanging around fighting the top dude in the division to see if they can beat the old top dude.
it's true. That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. And so, anyway, on that note, let's talk a little UFC 193. Got distracted there for a second. And first up, we got to talk. I mean, we got to talk Holly Holm, and most particularly, we got to talk Holm in reference to this story that came out about her coach saying that she had been like holding back and what's the term for it?
Sandbagging a little bit.
Sandbagging her MMA career.
Uh, I mean, first of all, I mean, like, this is 2 weeks in a row. Do we just need to make the "What the fuck do we know" like unofficial segment of this show? Because holy crap, did Holly Holm come out there and look fantastic?
Oh yeah. No,
And
I mean, well, that's the beauty of combat sports is that, like, with major team sports and things like that, and even not a single player, most single one-on-one sports, there are so many events that you get a really clear mark of progression every single time. Like you are
I,
seeing the person over and over again, week after week after week, competition after competition. And so it's really easy to track their progression over their career. With MMA, like every few months you see the person and you assume they're going to be relatively similar or improved in some degree from what they were last time out. But sometimes people just really totally shock you.
yeah, yeah, and I think the fact that we don't see these people. I mean, one of the things that we did say on the last show, just to be perfectly clear, is that we anticipated that maybe in a year or so that we would see a big jump from Holly Holm as she got more comfortable in the MMA sphere. And apparently that jump was last Saturday. And I don't really buy this narrative that got thrown out there, and now it seems Winklejohn's jumping on it. Like, oh yeah, we were kind of sandbagging it a little bit in her early part of the career. I mean, if that's true, they pulled off a fantastic long con, like just really, really great because it didn't look that way at all. It looked like somebody who was still kind of learning the game to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like a fighter who now 5 or 6 years in, things were suddenly, like 5 years in now, things were suddenly clicking. Like
Mm-hmm.
things had just started to snap together, and we see that all the time. And I think probably I think what he's really referring to, and what is much more likely the case, is that we've always had these other parts to her game that she hasn't been able to do because she hasn't been comfortable enough, and now she's able to do them. Like that's fair to me.
Yeah, and I think that's being misinterpreted in some ways. Because I would agree with that we do see that at like let's talk about someone else on the card just as an example real quick, and Johanna Jędrzejczyk. the last two fights, she has featured her kicking game way more than she previously had in her MMA career. And she was a big-time kicker when she was off in the pure striking world. And I wouldn't qualify that as her holding back in her early matches. That is simply she has integrated another part of her game of her striking game into her MMA game. Now that she's sufficiently comfortable with it. And I think that's kind of, we saw the comfort come, and then we saw more of Holly Holm's striking kind of come out in that.
Yeah, this looks, I mean, this was the kind of jump that, this is why this is kind of why we do this show, is because over these first 5-6 years, even 7 of a fighter's career, we do expect to see, it's almost fair to say you expect the unexpected. You expect fighters along these lines to make the kind of jumps and advancements that make them significantly better fighters than they were before. And the MMA the MMA mind frame is still very much unaccepting of that idea. It's still like, okay, I saw this person fight 3 times, regardless of when, what level they were at when I saw them fight. I now know exactly who they will always be as a fighter.
Yes, well, I will say that MMA fans are very able to accept one type of change in a fighter, and that is a negative change.
Yeah.
They are very quick to say, oh, this person's done, or this person's written off, or they're in decline. But gradual or even sudden improvements are usually not accepted. It's usually seen as something wrong with the opponent.
Yeah, and it's also a thing where, I mean, it's also a problem with the only change that MMA fans otherwise recognize is age. And it's very much treating age as like being young compared to being middle-aged rather than career time. It's like, oh, well, he's 30 and 30 is not old, so he should be fine. Or he's 26 and 26 is not old, so he should be fine. And then if somebody's 35, it's like, well, they're 35, so they've got to be done soon and they can't improve. And we know that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think that's kind of asserting itself in the sense of like how this fight's being reacted to, in that it is either it's either an exposing of Ronda Rousey, as she was never really that good, which I think we can dismiss that theory in the sense of that she's beaten better opposition, even with the Ronda Rousey win in Holly Holm's record. Ronda has beaten better opposition across her whole career than Holly.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm still not sold on Holly defending the belt against a top challenger other than Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, because I mean that level of performance is the first time we've seen that level of performance from Holly. Yeah. And again, as you said, I mean, it's let's see if she makes it if it's a consistent change. And so I think we can dismiss that. Likewise, I'm also want to just throw out all the like, well, Ronda had a really bad weight cut, or maybe Ronda wasn't in the best shape, or maybe Ronda wasn't, Ronda still got her game going. She actually was fairly competitive in moments of this fight. This wasn't like an Anderson Silva, Forrest Griffin wash where Holly just made Ronda look ridiculous the entire time and then finished her at her leisure. Holly got clipped a couple times hard. Holly got thrown on the ground. Holly got threatened with an armbar. This was more of a case of the Ronda that has been there showed up. To what degree, like what shape she was in or what headspace she was in varies from fight to fight. But we got a comparable Ronda Rousey that we've seen, and Holly Holm took her A game, stuffed it, and then beat the shit out of her in the second round.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great mark of improvement for Holm, and it is. I think it's something that you shouldn't let her coaches write it off as something that like a magic act she pulled. Such of it, or we would have seen it, and now she's done it, and that's because she's been fighting for a while. Like, it takes that long.
Yeah.
And it's still amazing that was able to do it. Like, that's still, Like it could honestly be a case of her matching up incredibly well with Ronda Rousey and then not with anyone else. Like, does Holly Holm beat Kat Zingano? Does Holly Holm beat Misha Tate? Maybe, but I'm not
I
a
think this
thousand.
is a really intriguing fight for Holly.
They both present a very different game from Ronda Rousey, and that may be something that Holm is totally prepared for, and it may be something that, like, she had just the right tools to exploit just, Ronda Rousey's exact problems.
Yeah, and I think another thing this fight demonstrated is the value of experienced MMA coaching and bigger camps. Because while a lot of people are kind of jumping up and down on Ronda's preparation, and I think to a degree that's I mean makes good sense, and that there are problems with her coaching, because Ronda's developed a game for MMA, and I feel like the game development got stunted when it hit outside fighting. Like when it hit out fighting, like the development really slowed. And
Mm-hmm.
for Holly, she has her A game, and her coaches, Jackson and Winklejohn, did a really great job arming her with just enough in the clinch and just enough on the ground to funnel everything back into her A game.
Yep.
And Ronda, to her credit, adjusted like her clinch fighting mid fight. She hit a really nice little trip takedown in response to what Holly was doing. And Holly later in the fight obviously took Ronda down with a really nice counter to Ronda's favorite throw. But Ronda was not able to really adjust on the outside at all, and really hasn't made any big improvements on the outside aside from the fact that she can hit for power now. Ronda can hit fairly hard now on the outside, but it's not really like a practical skill for her in like the bigger sense of what her game is.
No, none of Ronda's striking really funnels into the rest of her game at all.
It
Like
kind
her.
I was to say it
Hmm?
kind of reminds me of Phil Davis in Alliance, who
Yeah.
striking game just did not mesh with his grappling game at all, and he just kind of insisted on learning this very very out style that never let him close the distance, and it basically made him a worse wrestler.
Yeah. I mean, and Ronda, it's just like the thing for her is that everybody already knows she's going to come in looking to clinch, but the way she punches is a face first, arms out, brawling style that basically plays exactly into what every opponent is already expecting. Hard shots either way. It just sets her up less well. It doesn't take. There's no variation in her approach with the striking game she has. She's either face first, hands out to try and grab you, or face first, hands out to try and punch you. And either way, that leaves her open to getting hit very hard in return.
Yeah, no, it's and it should be said that Ronda is still at the point in her career where she can make big jumps in skill. Like she's
Oh
not
yeah,
at the point in her career where she's done. I mean, I'm saying like in terms of like from a broader perspective,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very much up to her what happens next. Because does she
Yep.
does she see more coaching? Is she going to rededicate to the sport, or is she kind of seemed like she was on her way out already heading into this fight? Does this hasten her on her way? Is this her like the moment in judo when she took bronze in the Olympics and then was set up to be like the star of U.S. judo heading into the next Olympics and decided to peace out and go to MMA? So,
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that moment for her, just because a lot of what drove that seemed to be money and a lack of respect
mm-hmm.
from judo. Like, she made $10,000 and nobody cared, and it was like, well, why do this again?
Yeah,
And MMA has not been that. Like, when she had the title, there was money and there was a lot of people caring.
yeah,
So I
and
don't expect her to turn away from it that quickly. But anyway, but before we get too sucked into this, let's move away from it just a little. We can come back to it a little with a discussion, maybe more of some striking and MMA stuff at the end. But I want to kind of move on to some of the other young fighters on this card, so we don't get too bogged down with Rousey Holm. Or let's just real quick, he was the other big prospect of note on this card, really the only other prospect of note on this card. And he's got a serious problem, it looks like.
You cut out, so I'm assuming you're talking about Matthews.
Yeah, sorry. I said, yeah, I was saying Jake Matthews was the other big prospect on this card, and he has a serious problem.
Well, I mean, I felt okay about him coming out of this fight. I mean, the first round was not good at all. If I'm remembering it correctly, he got caught with a head kick very early on, and then ended up basically in survival mode for a big portion of that round.
Well, it wasn't even just the head kick. He just got beat up. He just got absolutely outstruck on the feet all the way through, and then was in survival mode for the rest of the round.
Yeah. So I think it was very much like the 2 rounds were just because I think second round showed what he does very well. Because he showed a real talent for elbowing inside the guard.
Yep.
Which is just something that you don't see much anymore. You don't see a lot of guys that active from inside the closed guard. And it might be because there aren't a lot of guys who close their guard anymore. But I was heartened enough by his second round to still be positive about Matthews. I just really think he needs he has some very obvious holes at this point, and I don't know what the answer is for helping kind of close that technical gap. I don't want to just be a broken record and preach finding other coaching, but that may be what it takes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that he's still very obviously like a top 10 level athlete. What we saw in the second round was a fighter who, it almost seemed like a fighter who realized just how outclassed his opponent was physically, and was just like, what the hell was I doing last round? I can beat this guy absolutely anytime I want, any way I want.
Yeah.
And, he didn't fight like that at all in the first round. And I think that's really a coach had problem, and, or the Phil Davis problem, so to speak, which is that he's learning some different skills, but they're not connected skills at all.
I like how Phil Davis is just becoming our textbook example of learning disjointed skills.
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of fighters, but he was a great example just because of how much of a physical freak he looked like, how much of a wrestling pedigree he had, and how little he ended up being a fighter people wanted to watch.
I mean, just wanted to strike like Dominic Cruz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
who was the other guy? We had a couple other guys going there. I mean, Muntasri ended up winning big in a fight that, I mean, he was set up to look good in. And he won in classic Muntasri style. I mean, a spinning back kick to a spinning back fist KO.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a Uriah Hall-esque performance.
I think Uriah Hall's a very good point of comparison for him. I think he could end up being very similar to Uriah Hall in a lot of ways.
Which could be, in a division like middleweight, that's good enough to be a very clear top 15 fighter. In a division like welterweight, that may be
action fighter. Yeah. Sorry, we're getting a lot of cutouts. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, there's nothing else really on this card I think worth talking about. The only other person I will mention as a good point for, and I keep saying this and nobody fucking believes me, about how age is really not the core of MMA development. Time in the sport is that Dan Kelly is a noticeably better fighter than he was at any point in the past.
Yeah, that was noticeable.
At 38, he looks better. He is still improving, and I expect him to retire before he ever gets worse.
I would not disagree with that. I would just say that on some level, he set the bar really low for himself early in his career.
Yeah, I mean, he started from the basement. So we're talking about him being better. Like, he is now an acceptable low-level UFC fighter right now.
Yeah, was it the Patrick Wallace fight that is like notably like one of the worst fights ever?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
That was, and to his credit, he and Walsh both have that thing where like they make their opponents look even uglier because they are so tough and sloppy and
yeah,
um it's just like when you fight dudes like that who are wild and aggressive and tough, everybody looks bad.
yeah. That fight. Oh man, I think it was Jordan Breen actually brought this up and reminded me of this. That John Anik was like like in a press conference or something, and someone asked him like, John, what's the best UFC fight you've ever called? And he like was like, well, I don't know. I've seen a lot of great fights. I'll tell you what the worst one was. It was Kelly Walsh.
But I mean the point still being
Yeah.
that even at 38,
Oh yeah, that he is
um
definitely improving.
yeah, he's definitely improving. And yeah, and I will say, like, at some point, age will be a factor. It may be that he ends his career earlier than you know, I could see him, like I say, retiring before he's done improving. And that could be very much a factor of age and his long competitive judo career, where, you know, he's just got a back injury or a neck injury or something like that that just won't go away.
Yeah.
Very out.
I missed pretty much all of that. I heard him talking about injuries in his judo career, which I agree with. I think the long judo career, it beats up your body.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I could see with his age that he could have some injuries that just won't go away and that'll end his career early, but I do expect him to get better the whole way through.
Yeah.
Anyway, off of 193, that's really all there is to talk about on that. Not a lot of young talent. Let's talk about TUF Latin America 2, and most particularly Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah. Yeah. Kelvin Gastelum is going to be back in the octagon. Um, man, like I mean, we've got two guys on here on this card who are really excellent talents who have done who have stunted their career growth, not to a debilitating level, but have most certainly um, kind of held themselves back career wise because of weight and preparation issues. Um, Calvin Gastelum is, I mean, like when he's actually in the cage fighting, a pretty exciting, pretty talented fighter. Um, and man, it was just you wonder where he would be currently if he had kind of gotten his head on straight and had been able to make welterweight and not had to, um, wonder who they made him go fight Nate Marquardt as
Yeah.
like a punishment for missing weight in the Tyrone Woodley fight, which was the softest softball that UFC could give him while forcing him to go up in weight class.
Yep.
I mean, if they had given him a physical beast, that could have gone very badly.
And
I
he
like,
didn't look good in that middleweight fight either. He looked like he had trouble making weight too.
yeah, yeah. I think Gastelum was really exciting because he has fairly decent striking. He's got decent to good wrestling, and then just a really fantastic ability to transition between the standing aspect of grappling and the ground aspect of grappling. Just so quick to jump on submissions and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, and he's a top five. He's a top five-ish kind of athlete. He's still tracked in for a title shot within the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's still a guy who, if he wins this fight and like one other fight, may be the top contender for the welterweight title.
Oh, I don't disagree with that at all. And it's one of the he's got a natural feel for MMA, which is really quite good. And obviously, I think the biggest thing that could hold him back at this point is a lack of physicality to his game that I feel that the Tyrone Woodley fight kind of showed a little bit. Where when he got inside on Woodley, like there's no way he was going to be able to move Woodley around with any authority.
Yeah, but I have to wonder how much of that was down to how poorly prepared he was for that fight.
I mean
Like,
that's a factor that will only answer if he starts consistently being able to make weight cuts safely.
Yeah, because like otherwise, earlier on in his career, he's been a good physical force. Like Story and eventually Nico Musoke and Jake Ellenberger too. Like he's got some good physicality to his game, but he just looked like shit in that Woodley fight. I think it's really just all down to how well he takes care of himself.
Yeah.
Because he's getting to the point where, like, another couple of years and he should start to be a finished product. So he's got some more time to improve, to get better. But we're running to the point where we should be seeing, like he's already on the verge of contention. He's had a very fast, good rise. He's had the kind of rise that an elite prospect should, but if he doesn't take care of himself, if he doesn't get the proper prep for fights, he'll never be champ. I think he'll still end up with the title shot sooner or later.
Yeah.
But he'll never win at that point.
Yeah, no, I think he's kind of right on the cusp of being a pretty elite fighter. Like not, run away with the belt and hide with it sort of fighter, but the guy that can hang around in contention for several years. I think he's right on the cusp of that, and it's just a matter of what he does with that position and that talent.
Yeah, and to that extent, Cejudo has hurt himself much, much less. Like I think that his, obviously we know it's kind of lurking in the background, his problems with weight cutting and making weight and training seriously and all that. But that really seems to be a question of proper goals for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like since he's got into the UFC, since they punished him once and just basically told him like, you can't screw around with this, you've got to do it our way. He seems like he's just been an absolute model of consistency in training.
Yeah, I think so, and I think this matchup this weekend is a particularly good one for really testing him out because he's going up against a very different style of fighter. One that it's kind of like Formiga, like I feel like his real specialty, like his absolute skill is back taking. And that's going to be really interesting to see how that matches up with Cejudo. Because Formiga, man, sometimes he just friggin' teleports to the back. And I wouldn't be shocked because Cejudo is not a guy who tends to run people out of the cage. He's in there for the duration. In that kind of time span with Formiga, like I would expect Formiga to put him in a tough spot at least once, and I want to see how Cejudo responds to that. Because athletically, another level for Cejudo. Wrestling, outstanding, and competitiveness when he actually gets in there. Cejudo is a beast.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just kind of unfortunate for him that as like this great, amazing, elite wrestler, flyweight is the worst division to be that fighter. Like, there's no division in MMA where your wrestling is of less value than flyweight.
Yeah.
Nobody there gets held down. Nobody there gets controlled. You know,
Yeah.
any fighter that's competing in that division consistently pops right back to their feet the moment you put them on their back. And Formiga is certainly the guy who can do that too. And it's really, oh, sorry, what?
I was gonna say, just like when you're talking about that, man, like you think about no matter what gym you're at, if you're at flyweight, you're the smallest dude in your MMA gym. Like being held down when you're a flyweight going into a flyweight fight, it's like the day when the guy your size shows up to the gym and you're just like, thank God I don't have to go with a goddamn middleweight today.
Absolutely. And for me, like, this is the fight that if Cejudo wins this fight, I don't think he can be rushed. I don't think that the UFC can put him in a title shot too soon. Like, I think that he's absolutely lined himself up for the next available shot at Demetrius Johnson if he beats Formiga.
I think that would be a fight that would get Johnson a bit of shine. Like maybe not like MMA fans being like, "Oh man, I want to watch this," but there would at least be a slight like buzz in this MMA sphere, or like amongst people who kind of follow combat sports, that like at like a really like, because I think there is a little bit outside like the martial arts community, people like the lighter weight fighters like theoretically because they will talk about how they're more skilled and more exciting. Then they don't actually tune in to watch them.
No.
But I think hearing that like an Olympic wrestler is facing off against Demetrius Johnson might, I'm not saying it's going to break any pay-per-view records. It might create a little bit more buzz around the Demetrius Johnson fight than when Johnson was fighting like, who was it, Carriasso, or, the warm body of the month.
Yeah, or even Horiguchi, who MMA fans love, but is never going to be like, no casual fan is ever going to be excited by the flyweight Japanese guy that doesn't speak English. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
The thing that I think the big thing for me that actually makes me want to see at this point, if Cejudo wins this, to see him get rushed to the title shot, because it would be a rush. I mean, this is somebody who started in 2013 fighting, who's, and who's just finishing up he's at 2.5 years right now as a pro. So he is on that elite, very rare few title contender track. But I would be happy to see him get an early shot at the belt, because I think if he loses, that's exactly the right kind of thing to keep him motivated.
Yeah. I think, and for him, it is a matter sometimes of motivation, because I mean that was kind of the book on him coming out of wrestling, is that he's a phenomenal talent, but he has to be interested. You got to,
and I mean he got the gold medal in wrestling, and so it was just like, and then his motivation was gone.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in Cejudo. I'm interested in this fight. I think Cejudo can win it, I think he deserves to be the odds-on favorite to win it, but for me, it has a real chance to take it from him.
Yeah, I think he's facing an elite flyweight. This is going to be, this should be a really fun, interesting, informative fight, because, and part of it is the flyweights, it's a bit of a shallow division. I think part of the reason why people talk about Demetrius Johnson not having any pop is that, people were excited about the flyweight when he was fighting Ian McCall in that tournament, and Joseph Benavidez and John Dodson. Like, he didn't have this like idea of him being boring around him so much. It was when he faced, Moraga and Bogatinov and Carriasso, where it was just like a bunch of guys that even fairly well-informed MMA fans had to like look the guy up before he fought them, that like the interest in him really waned. So I think that there is a chance that Demetrius Johnson could be a more intriguing fighter within the MMA sphere, but I don't think he's ever going to be a star.
No, God, no. I think we're well past the point where if it was going to happen at some point in the past seven or so years he's been competing, it would have happened.
And it's unfortunate that this becomes the discussion every time he's brought up, because he's a phenomenal fighter. Legitimately one of the most technical fighters in the sport.
So another guy I want to talk about, and it's the only one, I admit freely that I didn't watch TUF Latin America 2, but I heard enough pop about one of the fighters. Them both. Horacio Gutierrez looks like a legit potential talent.
Well, you cut out right, and I heard legit talent, so I'm assuming you're talking about Gutierrez, and you're cutting out again.
Fuck, whatever. Go.
Talk. I'm assuming we're talking about Gutierrez.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Gutierrez actually looks like he could be an interesting fighter, because he's a pretty awesome athlete. And he's, for lightweight, has some pretty good power in his hands. And is a fairly technical striker and can stop a takedown or two, which, man, you don't see that often on TUF. Like on TUF, usually it's like the grindy wrestler who like runs through the house, or like the dude with like one really particular skill set. And usually the strikers struggle on TUF. And I think he could actually be, at this point, basically TUF seasons give us one decent fighter a show, it feels like, and I think Gutierrez could be a pretty solid fighter coming off of the show.
Yeah, and I will admit I've heard some good, people are talking about Barzola as well, and I watched him. I do like his style. He looks fun, but he's almost certainly a featherweight, and he really is not very fast. That's to a sort of problematic degree.
Yeah, when you're a featherweight and you're not fast, that's a problem.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes because I like his style. He's got kind of a fun, funky game, but he's too small to be a lightweight, and he may not be fast enough to be a featherweight.
Yeah.
Let's see. Otherwise, the big prospect matchup to talk about off this card is Eric Perez, Taylor Lapilus.
All right.
And Perez isn't exactly a prospect anymore at this point. So he's just kind of, I don't know. He's a very good athlete. He's still a young fighter, but I don't know what we're going to see out of him for the next 5 years. I don't know if he's going to get better or if he's just going to be really inconsistent, if he's going to stay the same. I think with Eric Perez, you have to kind of taper your expectations. But I'm really excited about what we'll see out of Lapilus.
Yeah, I mean, Perez, he kind of got the anti-Caraway push his last fight, where just like fans seem to rally behind whoever's fighting Eric Caraway that month or like that like quarter, and he kind of, I feel like, let people down. But in that was lost that he's actually a pretty solid young fighter. And Brian Caraway is in fact a really tough fight for pretty much anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that factor in it. But I would agree about. I'm very excited to see what Lapilus brings to the table as well, because in his last UFC fight, he looked really, really good.
Yep.
And I think it's a performance that I feel like has been kind of forgotten a bit, because it was on a Fight Pass card. It was a European Fight Pass card undercard fight. But man, he looked like his striking game came together in a big way in his last fight. And Eric Perez is going to strike with him, and we're going to get a really good look at seeing where Lapilus kind of stands. I would agree with you. I think that this is the best prospect versus prospect fight on this card.
Yeah, and it's a massive step up for Lapilus. He's only really beaten kind of the very low end of bantamweight in the UFC, and Perez is borderline top 15, top 20 kind of guy. Perez is a top 5, top 10 level athlete, so it'll be interesting to see if Lapilus's game, very much, the sort of Joanna game of being stopping all the takedowns and being a good striker holds up against a good athlete who will attempt to take him down quite a lot.
Yeah. I just love the way you said "stop all the takedowns" in an extremely a very meme-ish way.
It's true. But so Andre Fili's also on this card. He's still a bit interesting. His losses aren't terrible to date. He had the kind of loss against Godofredo Pepe that a guy like him, who is willing to take the fight anywhere his opponent is willing to take the fight, is gonna have.
Yeah.
But otherwise, getting beat by Max Holloway is certainly no shame on him. And I don't know. I expect this to be a bounce back win for him over.
Yeah. I mean, the Pepe loss. So he's had. I feel like Fili's inconsistency is kind of, as you said, a result of his willingness to just fight anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of he'll let his opponent pick where the fight takes place sometimes. I think Pepe is a tough fight in the sense that he's really athletic, he's fairly skilled, and he's crazy aggressive to the point of being like just almost not smart about it at times. And that in itself is dangerous. Like, Pepe is the guy who doesn't care. He does the kind of moves that, like, if you're going with the old like mindset of the warrior things, like Pepe does stuff and he doesn't care if he dies. Like, if I get this guy, I win, and then if I don't, I lose, and I'm okay with that. And you're used to facing opponents who are slightly more conservative than that. and Pepe throws caution to the wind. I think for Feely, this does smack of a bounce back fight. Feels like they're softballing him a little bit to let him kind of get his feet back under him and kind of see what he still has to offer, which I think he'll be fine. Training out of a big camp, being fairly young, being a good athlete. He seems to me like the guy at Alpha Male who doesn't really have a game per se developed yet, and he's much more like the dude that is there. And whoever he's facing, he just tries to like start having the anti-game. He's like the Luke Rockhold of Team Alpha Male, where Luke Rockhold is an AKA like a room full of wrestler grinder types, and he's the counter wrestler striker. And Feely kind of feels like he's going to end up being that dude out of Alpha Male. That's all I got. Oh. This one's not good.
Watchable. Under the impression that Tom is the one that's gone this time around.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back.
You froze in a really amusing facial expression for me, though.
Good. Well, on that note, let's move over to very briefly, because it only has one fighter to talk about at all on it. World Series of Fighting 25. Just to give a quick shout out to Islam Mamedov.
Yep.
Who I believe trains out of Khabib's camps, both AKA and what's his?
Yeah, the whatever it is. I'm blanking on it too, but
yeah, I can't remember.
Dag Fighter?
No, it's I want to say something Eagle, or Fight Spirit team.
Oh, that's it. Yes, yeah. So, and Islam has a really similar game. I mean, like to the guys coming out of that camp, he's like a really standard Russian MMA fighter. He's like a low volume power striker. But I feel like he's a little bit more comfortable on the feet than Khabib is. Likes clinch takedowns. Once he's on top, he's got a good sense of position and submission, and he'll beat the crap out of you while he's there. And a fun fighter. Busts out a lot of more wrestling holds. Like uses like cradles and things like that. So a little bit different of a ground game than like your standard jiu-jitsu or submission grappler type. Fun guy, good athlete, and I think could end up being someone worth knowing about in his division.
Well, and he might also end up winning this tournament. His first round fight is with George Patino, who I think he's a very big favorite to beat. Patino is not a notably, he's been around forever, basically, and he doesn't have a game that's really tailor-made to beat Mamedov. And then, he's on the same Mike Ricci, Joe Condon side, where Ricci is almost certainly going to beat Condon.
Yeah.
And so Mamedov versus Ricci in the second round. Like, Mamedov, I think, is a pretty reasonable favorite to get to the finals, where he'll very likely face either Luis Palomino or Brian Foster. And it's the third fight of a tournament with two strikers who aren't necessarily known for their great cardio. Mamedov might be the guy to take it late.
Yeah.
Take it all the way.
Man, you remember when Ricci was like one of the top prospects in MMA?
No, actually I don't. I remember when he was on TUF and then everybody hated him, but I never remember him being a great prospect, I'll admit.
I'm trying to remember. He beat somebody that kind of put his name on the map. That got
probably Jesse Ronson or Jordan Meehan. He beat Jordan Meehan.
He beat Jordan Meehan early. He beat somebody else that like dropped a lot of jaws. That like, let's see. It might have been the Jordan Meehan win. He beat Jordan Meehan, and then
he fought Darren Cruikshank and Pat Curran, but lost to both of them.
Yeah, I don't really remember what it was then. It must have been the Jordan Meehan win when he beat Jordan Meehan. That like turned a lot of heads.
Yeah, I think so. Because that was Jordan Meehan at the time was 14-5, and
And then he was like, "Ooh, he's a training partner of George St. Pierre." Like, you know.
yeah, I think that may have been when he was a name, but I never had heard of him at that point. I only knew him off TUF, and by the time he was there, nobody really seemed to care.
I mean, like, and it also kind of works off of like the way we assign prospects. That like
Yeah.
Sage Northcutt is kind of like becoming that a little bit for me, where he's getting a lot of headlines. So people are conflating how good of a fighter he is currently. I feel like.
Oh yeah, and they've now seen him twice in dominant wins. Like he's fought twice, right? Or is it just once?
I think he's only fought once in the
Okay,
UFC.
they've seen him fight once in the UFC for a dominant win. If he does that two more times, like really regardless of competition, and beats his competition handily, people are just going to be like, "Oh, he's a killer forever." And the moment he hits a better fighter, and if he loses, it'll be like, "Oh, see what a bum."
Yeah, I mean, like it was just one of those things that we've seen him fight once against a tough but not like super testing fighter,
No.
and then he's gotten so it's gone from like, oh, this young guy like is really athletic and could be something, to I think I saw something that labeling him a mega prospect today. That's just
Yep.
like, whoa, like let's calm down on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean he is an elite athlete. That's a
Yeah,
big thing for him. He is that rare athlete who appears to have been tracked into one sport out of passion very early in his life and stayed with it, most likely because his parents had enough money that he never needed to think about the idea of playing other sports to make money.
yeah,
So, um, but he's definitely a top tier athlete who has somehow found his way to being an MMA fighter for reasons that just are almost pure luck.
because he can bend frying pans.
Yep. Um, so let's turn over to Bellator real quick before we finish up our show. And I mean, the first foremost prospect to talk about on here is Hisaki Kato. Really, um, he's in the head. The main event fight. He's not young. He's another fighter who's he's in his early 30s. He's 33, but
Man,
um,
there's
he's
a
only been. Oh yeah,
there's a world. I'm worried for Kato in this because like there's a world of difference between facing off with Joe Schilling and MMA about Melvin Manhoff, even current Melvin Manhoff. Like
even a Melvin Manhoff who got knocked out by Joe Schilling.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I feel, I'm I feel like for Joe Schilling, I'm not entirely sure what to make of him as an MMA fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think the transitive property of MMA is going to apply here.
It might not. I don't know. It's interesting because Schilling does seem like the kind of guy who only has a chance or who is only going to be better an opponent when his opponent plays exactly his game,
Yeah,
which Manhoff did. Whereas Manhoff is somebody who can beat a lot of guys who have a very wide, diverse range of skill sets.
yeah, and it's I mean, and he's so young into his MMA career. I mean, like we're just past the 2 year mark for him.
Yep,
Manhoff is a really tough test for someone in their first 2 years.
it
Even
is.
even 2015 Melvin Manhoff is a really tough test.
It'll be interesting. I mean, the big things Kato has on his side are a long history of experiencing Kudo. So it's not exactly like he just hasn't been doing, a somewhat comparative martial art, sort of on the combat sambo end of karate.
Yeah, it's my favorite part of Kudo is miming the head stomps after you throw someone like hands
Yeah,
down. I want him to do that in an MMA fight.
that
Just
would be pretty
just
hilarious.
for those of you that for our both of our listeners, who aren't familiar with Kudo, it is a mashup of karate and judo, but they don't want striking on the ground really because they're worried about the damage it could cause. So you mime striking on the ground, including faking head stomps by stomping next to their head after you've thrown them. And I want to see him do that in an MMA fight.
That would be pretty great. But I don't know. Like Kato has, I don't think he's, I wouldn't like peg him as some elite prospect or something, but he does strike me as exactly the kind of fighter that Bellator could build and that Coker could build into somebody that fans really think of as an elite talent.
I think they could. I think Kato, it could be his Bellator Kung Lee.
Yeah. He could be that kind of guy where fans are like, no, where they have debates about whether Kung Lee could beat Anderson Silva in their primes. I remember that being an open debate.
I remember it also.
Yeah, I could see Kato being that kind of guy where you just get some ridiculous shit said about him, and he's fun, and he's well booked, and he fights fun fights. But it's always with an eye to keeping him in just the right kind of fight.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other fighters to look at, especially on the main card, are Jordan Parsons versus Bubba Jenkins.
Yep. Bubba
Jenkins has hit a snag against Karakanyan, but not one that it's not a real snag. Honestly, like, he should never have been in that Karakanyan fight at all. He wasn't ready. He was never going to be ready for it yet.
Yeah.
Jenkins is not an uber prospect. He is a good wrestler. He is a great wrestler who is following the prototypical prospect path in MMA.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Scott Coker's going to know how to handle a dude like Jenkins better than previous administrations there.
Well, the Karakanyan fight was under Coker, so.
Oh, that's right. I thought that was oh God, I'm just looking it up. That was earlier this year. It seems like so long ago. All right, so I clearly they overestimated. I don't know. I have no way.
It was a late. I think it was just they wanted to build Karakanyan to a title shot immediately. I think.
Oh, that's right. I'm barely remembering this at all.
And then Karakanyan got injured, and so it was all moot. Like, I believe, Karakanyan's been injured ever since that Bubba Jenkins fight, and so because he was supposed to fight Patricio Freire right after that, and
it all fell apart.
He tore his ACL, and he's been out ever since.
Yeah, no. So, all right, never mind about that whole thing. Forget what I just said. That gets filed under the "what the fuck do I know" category. But I do think that Jenkins is the guy, like you said. He seems to be following. Like, he needs a little bit softer of a hand in terms of development, and that's not like a knock on him. That's just how his development's going. I still think he could end up being a very, very good MMA fighter. He just needs to be brought along in the right way, and the Karakanyan fight was not the right way to do that.
No. This Parsons matchup is a much better one. They're both really similarly prepared prospects at this point in their career, and Parsons seems like one of those guys who is a very athletic MMA native. So he could end up being a very good fighter, or he could be one of those guys who just never quite sees any one skill. I'm really not quite sure yet where he'll fall along that line, but this fight with Bubba Jenkins is a great matchup between two prospects on that scale.
Yep.
And otherwise,
there's this really young dude called Josh Neer fighting for him.
Oh yeah, the ever young Josh Neer. What a great young talent he could be.
Hey, original logo of Bloody Elbow.
That's right. The Bloody Elbow logo. And then there's Ben Ryder, who is 16-0 on the prelims, and who made his name fighting down in Peru. And he basically cut his teeth fighting in Peru a bunch.
Ooh, I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, and he's American.
And I'm really not sure. That's like willingly choosing to go fight in Ukraine
Yeah, but I mean, this is now his third Bellator fight, and he beat Benji Radek last time.
Okay, so yeah, no, he's just man, Peru.
Yeah, he's
How
showing
do you,
some real talent now, but it's interesting to see like how far he's actually going to go and what that all means, because it is a really weird career path.
we should also point out that was Benji Roddick's first fight in 5 years when he
Yeah.
lost it. Like he'd been out of the game since losing to OSP and Strikeforce.
Yeah, it's not a meaningful win. It's just like, I think he's somebody that he came in. He's the kind of fighter that Bellator is getting. The guys the UFC is passing over, guys who have really weird padded records that still look good.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bellator is working to turn those into viable either contenders or the guys that keep their contenders propped up, as we've seen them want to do over and over again. Like, somebody like Ryder may become if Kato beats Manhoof,
Yeah, one
and
thing I'll
it's a
say,
way to propel Kato onward.
Ryder for a middleweight, he's big.
Yeah.
6'3", and he is cut up. He is a big, strong guy. So that in itself too is pretty. I mean, he athletically he can compete. It'll be interesting to see how he does going forward.
Otherwise, there's not much note else. I'd have to take a look at the other fights, but we want to talk just, I don't know, briefly if we have time. I don't know what kind of budget we're running on, but
I'm running out of time here, but
all right. So maybe we'll.
Actually, it's something that like I originally took a look at it, and then when I actually looked at like how strikers, people crossing over from striking arts progress through MMA, it's honestly like there's no discernible pattern. They follow the prospectus. Like Holly Holmes and Johanna Jędrzejczyk are outliers in every sense.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like that's the thing that I don't know. I feel like I have these points that they are shown generally true over the course of history in MMA, but are just so hard to swallow that like experience in one does not lead to immediate success in the other. Like you can't just come over to MMA with a great Muay Thai background or a great kickboxing background or a great BJJ background get into like immediate elite MMA success.
There are no silver bullets. Like there's nothing to guarantee you that. You just have to be the right combination of athleticism, mindset, and skills to go on that kind of run. And I mean, in women's bantamweight, we got to see two of them meet. We got to see Ronda and Holly, and Holly is on a nice run of her own.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the reason we see the reason women may be the outliers here is just because their divisions are way weaker.
Yep. Athletically speaking, Holm is on a level with the like of a Ronda. And Jędrzejczyk is on an elite athlete level and has a lot of combat sport experience where a lot of her opponents don't.
Yeah, and it's maybe not even the experience. It's just like she's, obviously it's shown in her skill, her deep technical skill that a lot of her fighters are coming in just with absolutely nothing. It's not even like, oh, I've got some wrestling and jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. Some of them are just like, I just started fighting and I'm an MMA native with as much skill as you, and you're an MMA native or with as much time in MMA as you, and you have also been doing Muay Thai your whole career, so you're a very good striker. But it's not something where you see even people with that just jump in and immediately become great. But on that note, I'm saying that you need to cut it off. Yeah. So let's cut things short, and we'll come back and maybe get further into this next week. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find us both on Bloody Elbow. Please give this video a like. That's a thumbs up. And subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM. Both those things help us out a ton. We'll have more content coming at you. 6th round, knuckle up. And then we'll be right back at it with the If I Did It, Care, Don't Care, vivisections, all that for next week. Well, we'll see what we do next week. Next week's Thanksgiving. Some of us might And tune in. We'll have some stuff for you coming up next week. Thanks everyone for watching this time around, and we will see you soon.